Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. We will get started shortly. We're going to let a few more people join us in the webinar. So if you'll just hang on tight, about another minute or so, we will get started. Okay, I think we're going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to the Insight Advanced webinar of 3 best practices for giving teachers ownership of their professional development. Thanks again. We know everyone's really busy, so we appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. I am happy to introduce, I'll get started with myself, but also our guests. My name is Don Roscigno. I'm the CEO of Insight Advanced. I have been serving the education industry, hard to believe these words are going to come out of my mouth, but almost 20 years. Majority of my career, really passionate about supporting educators in their professional growth. I come from a family of educators, from my grandmother, who is an immigrant to this country, who spent her career as a teacher, to her 2 sons, my uncle, who spent much of his career as an educator, and my father, who taught in Chicago schools for over 50 years. This is something that's very personal to me. I'm very passionate about it. I'm very excited to be joined by Dennis Dotterer. So Dennis, why don't you tell folks about yourself?
Sure. I was a teacher at the elementary and middle school level for many years. This is actually my 23rd year in education. I've also been an administrator at both the elementary and middle school, and then worked for the State Department for the last 10 years around the idea of human capital. And I say specifically human capital because not only did we focus on teacher observations and coaching, but we also focused on how to utilize the data from teachers to be able to support them as an individual and stop this idea of evaluation and really move toward this idea of using observations as a tool to grow collegiality as well as professionalism and effectiveness. And so most of everything that I've done for the last 10 years, including all my dissertation work, has really been around how to utilize an observation to support teaching to best support our students.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And then we're also joined by Melanie Maddie. Melanie, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I am coming to you from Wade Hampton High School in South Carolina. I have 14 years of teaching experience. I spent the first part of those years here at Wade Hampton teaching, and decided needed a change. Went to the elementary school in our close by and began teaching there, and eventually was able to come out of the classroom and work as a master teacher, coaching other teachers and growing practices there, and then chose to come back to the high school, my first love. And I'm currently a history teacher and instructional coach. So I teach part-time, and then I share the instructional coach with another teacher at the school. And she and I co-lead PLCs and leadership. And I'm glad to be with you guys today.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie. Great to have you here. Looking forward to a great discussion. As we get started, I want to encourage the folks that are joining us here live to join the conversation at some point. We are going to have time for questions at the near the end of our time together, but you will want to use the question feature on the dashboard. Just look for that. There's a little spot that says questions, and if you'll click that, you'll be able to submit questions throughout, and then we'll get to the ones we can get to near the end. Also, we have a free download for you, an ebook that comes from Insight Advanced called Feedback Strategies for Coaches and Administrators. That's also on your dashboard. So if you take a look there, there's a section called handouts. You'll be able to grab that PDF directly from the dashboard. And then we will also be tweeting from @InsightAdvance. We'll be sharing various links and resources, some of which we will talk about during this webinar, maybe a few additional ones. We want you to share your thoughts as well, and go ahead and use the hashtag #AdvanceChat. We recently launched our own Twitter chat, which we'll be doing once a month. If you're not following us on Insight Advance, @InsightAdvance on Twitter, please do, because we're sharing resources all the time, and maybe you can join us for our next Twitter chat. I'm switching to this article, a recent Education Week article, and you'll notice that the title of the article is very similar to our event. It really was the inspiration for this. This was a feature that Education Week did about the work that Dennis and his team at the South Carolina Department of Education is doing to really support educator growth throughout the state, and specifically in several districts where they felt they needed the most help. And so you're going to be able to hear today from Dennis's experiences and leading that effort, and really what he's learned. Probably some things too that were mistakes that, you know, he's going to tell you, you probably shouldn't do this. We tried this and it didn't work, right, Dennis? And go from there.
That's the best way to learn.
That's right. And then also from Melanie's unique perspective of not just from the teacher, but also from the coach perspective of what's it like to really organize this and put it to work on the ground and make it successful. So we can tweet out this link via Insight Advance for everyone if they want to see this article as well. So just sort of setting, you know, expectations of what are we trying to do here. We're going to take a look just briefly at traditional professional development and really kind of challenge the status quo there. You know, I don't think I would be alone by saying that traditional professional development has become one of those things that people just kind of groan or roll their eyes at. And I think we've all realized that what was considered professional development for decades really hasn't had the impact that many people wish it would have. So we'll get into that a little bit. But then more specifically, we will talk about what are the challenges that the folks in South Carolina had. What did Dennis have to do at the Department of Education, you know, to overcome those challenges? And again, as stated before, what are the best practices for success? What are 3 things that you can take away from this and say, okay, if I focus on these 3 things, I'm going to be on the right pathway? Additionally, we'll talk about the role of ed tech, and more specifically, the advancement of using video to support educator growth. There's more and more talk about this than ever, and that is part of what's being done here in South Carolina. And then really take a look at what the impact is on instructional coaching and instruction teaching, you know, on the ground with teachers. So let's get started. Talking about this problem that I was just referencing. School districts and schools, and Dennis, please, and Melanie, please feel free to chime in on any of this in your experience. There's a lot of different efforts for PD trying to support teachers, trying to improve practice, but they're very siloed and disconnected. And, you know, there's a lot of this traditional idea of let's bring somebody in, have them talk, and then that's really going to make a big change for our teachers. But here's the thing that people don't really talk about is, yes, these ideas are disconnected, but they're spending a great deal of time, resources, specifically budget, to try and do this, but it's really not working. And, you know, studies are showing that it can be as high as $18,000 per teacher per year is being spent. The average is really more around $6,000 to $8,000 a year, but you can see from this that educators are saying this is not working. It's not moving my practice. I'm not growing professionally. So this is the problem that's out there. It's common, and we're trying to solve. So here's what the traditional professional development has looked like. A person comes in, stands in front of a room, and talks. And Dennis, you know, maybe you could give your perspective on this. What is that? What has that been like for, you know, for your organization? Has it, and what has changed your thinking about it?
Well, I think that when you look at professional development as a whole, we have seen a lot of growth over the last 20, 30 years. I mean, anybody who's been in education more than 10, 12 years has seen that idea move from this sit and get, I remember as a teacher, as a new teacher, having to sit with 120 other new teachers and be told this is the way it's going to be and this is what we need to do, and then be sent off on my own. So, that has progressively moved toward more the PLC models, the idea of having more smaller collaborative units. But I think where a lot of times we still miss the boat in our PLCs is the idea that they're not structured very well. And so PLCs become a time that you can talk about what color shirt are we going to have for the festival this summer or this upcoming. And, have you heard about what is happening over at X high school in the district, rather than what really needs to be able to be a time that teachers can analyze themselves, their students, and grow. So I think that's where we're still learning and still growing. But I also think that that's why we're here, is finding new and better ways to be innovative, to be able to make this professional development more focused and more powerful, while not stressing teachers out more.
Right. And Melanie, yes, please go ahead.
To that, definitely just following up with the teachers. I mean, I've been a part of the sit and get one-day trainings. They give you these resources and you never hear from these people again. They're not in the trenches with you. They're not in your school. And so I think part of the frustration on the teacher side of it is, okay, it's like implement these things, but there's really no ongoing support in that type of professional development.
I think what you just said there, Melanie, is so critical, that it's that folks that can come in from the outside don't have the perspective of that school district. They don't know what it's like, and I think that's a really critical piece. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what works, and this isn't going to be a deep dive on this, but I think it's worth covering here before we start jumping in on some of the things that were happening in South Carolina. More and more research is available, and I don't have to list it all here, but more and more research is available about coaching being the main thing that is really moving the needle of success for educator growth. And there is a great article, and I know we can, at some point tweet this out as well. Taking teacher coaching to scale. It's an Education Next article. Matthew Kraft and David Blazer. Great article about really taking a look at this. What does one-on-one coaching look like? How is it sustainable? And how can it move a teacher's practice forward? But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Harvard University's work as well, not just with the Best Foot Forward project, but most recently Harvard has created the Visibly Better Working Group. And a shout out to Tom Kane and Marion Greenberg from Harvard University, who have just done tremendous work in this area of studying what impact, as we'll talk about soon, what impact video can have in helping with educators growing their practice, and specifically around the areas of using it for self-reflection, using it for peer feedback and collaboration, and using it for instructional coaching or having mentor teachers help, whether it's at the teacher induction level or it's the more seasoned teachers, helping them really shine a light on their practice and look for areas to improve or things to continue to do well. That's a funny thing that we tend to do, is always say what's wrong and what needs to get better. But I think just as important, video can shine a light on what's going well and what a teacher can continue to do. So just a shout out to those folks for some tremendous work that they're doing. Dennis, there were a couple of things that you wanted to share or that you've learned is really working in growing teacher practice and helping with professional learning. So love to hear your thoughts.
And connecting to really what Harvard University was talking about with and looking at some work groups, taking that further into what video allows more for is talking with the Carnegie Foundation's work with network improvement communities. So it's taking that PLC and really understanding the idea of how to use it, how to use technology to better support PLCs over space and time. So I think that's one key that I didn't mention here, but also when we start talking about transformative learning theory and constructive developmental theory, these are theories and where a lot of research goes around of understanding how reflection as a teacher, reflection and practice, first so going to the coaching, but bringing coaching to the next level, that teachers can start coaching themselves. Teachers can start really understanding how to be critically reflective, because I think most of us know that if you talk about observation, teachers think evaluation, think a gotcha. And this idea of reflection and having teachers understand that anytime I can reflect on my practice, I'm getting better. And that's where these two theories come around, is focusing on getting teachers to know how to reflect and then getting them to utilize that in their own individual environment. So it takes that big, like we were talking about, that professional development, and making it so individualized. It's about those 22 kids and what you did in that classroom. And that may be different than what you do in next period, or it may be different than what you do in next semester. That's really, to me, what the focus of the next level of teaching becomes.
You know, I wanted to just pinpoint one thing you said there about the word observation and how it often goes to evaluation. And this is really more about coaching and really about self-reflection. I think one of the things that is a common thread in the work that we talk about doing at Insight Advance, or also the work that I was just citing with Harvard and the Visibly Better group, is that role of self-reflection. But I think what comes with it is the idea of giving a teacher control and taking control of their own professional learning. And I was just wondering, Melanie, if you could talk a little bit about that and what you've seen. I know we'll get into it a little bit more, but how that sort of fits into the work that you do.
I think that when it comes to being able to have control of being that reflective practice on your own, it is something that takes time. I shared that, when I first started teaching, videoing myself and having to watch myself was not something that I was really gung-ho for. I was very skeptical about it. Why do I need to watch this? And then I was able to transform that when I went into a leadership coaching role and think, really, how can I coach someone else when I haven't really been reflecting on the practices in my own personal classroom? And so what's powerful for me is exactly what Dennis said. When I can watch and say, you know what, if I tweak this one little thing, I'm going to get a totally different outcome from my students than what I got in this lesson. And for me, it's all about my student outcomes. So how am I changing my practice to meet the needs of the kids in my classroom the next day, but also, like Dennis said, the next semester as well, especially if you're teaching the same content a few years or semesters in a row.
Right. Excellent. All right. We will keep going. So at this point, I'm going to quiet down a little bit, and I would really love to hear, just from the perspective of the South Carolina Department of Ed, and again, Melanie, your perspective at the school level and also helping with coaching, issues that we were trying to solve in South Carolina. So Dennis, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop these all up on the screen and just kind of let you run through them.
Sure. So really, in South Carolina, we're not unique in this in any way, but we were lucky enough to get about $150 million worth of federal grants to focus on teacher effectiveness and building the human capital and moving from one step to the next. So what we really then started realizing is that while we were moving toward more learning, the first hurdle that we had to get out of is new learning occurred by going to a conference, and really getting out of that idea of you have brilliant people in your building, and new learning needs to be able to personalize that so that you can become experts within your building to then provide the new learning for the other 60, 80, 100, depending on what size your building is, people in there. So really that idea of how then you can personalize this learning to be able to move on. And again, we moved to then PLCs and the coaching model to really focus on how can I support each other? Because in South Carolina, we had an observation method I'm going to say evaluation because it wasn't even observation method, that was called APT. And it was a checklist of 52 things. And what teachers would do is, and I got to admit, this was me. It was a test to see how quickly you could hit all 52 of those things to get the administrator out of your classroom.
Wow.
You know, I was able to do it in 17 and a half minutes. That was my best time. But that was my formal observation was, you know, once I hit all 52 of them, one of them happened to be use humor. You know, you check that one and the administrator walks out. That model has gone away, and that idea of coaching has come through. The issue with coaching, though, is it's expensive. When you start talking about FTEs in a building, especially at a high school, and Melanie can speak a little bit to this as well, is that when you're talking about a high school with 4 instructional coaches, because content is so different, you're talking about upwards of $300,000 in personnel when you talk about the person, and then you also add the fringe benefits and doing all that with them. So because of that, that becomes extremely expensive, which then leads to questions on sustainability. So while we know having someone there to coach is what we need, we also know that school districts can't necessarily afford this. And, you know, in South Carolina, we have a lot of rural areas. And as I'm sure a lot of you do, that, you know, they're lucky to be able to get teachers for the classroom. So that becomes an issue when it comes to sustainability. And even with this $150 million of grants that we got, the question then became, how do we continue to use this? Because, you know, it's great that the money was there and we did all the training, but if we stop, does all of this stop and go away? Or how do you create that continuation? And then being able to really, for school districts and school boards to understand, how can we do what we've done and maximize the time, but yet utilize a budget that doesn't stretch us?
Right.
And, you know, so that became really a lot of the issues that we started looking at as we started running toward the end of the grant last year was, oh no, okay, we're about to run out of money, and we have a lot of districts that aren't going to be able to pick up the same tab. So what can we do to maximize their ability to continue what we know works with coaching and really focusing on that individualized PD?
Got it. Well, that is the perfect segue then to getting us into the 3 things that you found, you know, you really needed to do. So I think we got a little sense of what doesn't work there and the challenges you had, but we'll jump right into your first point here about building leadership. So I'll let you have at it.
So really this goes to the idea of personalized PD. So what we decided to do was focus on the leadership team. And within that leadership team, if the school was good enough or lucky enough to have an instructional coach, then that person obviously, but the use of mentor teachers, teacher leaders, to really identify these leadership people who can have these instructional conversations, who understand pedagogy, who understand best practices through specific content, and then really be able to use this team to identify where we need to go. How do we need to be able to work with a kindergarten teacher and a 5th grade teacher? How do we work with a U.S. history teacher as well as an AP biology teacher or an AP physics teacher? Very, very different content. So how do we personalize this so everybody's not sitting in the same? I was in a PD last week, and they were saying they were trying to get all teachers to focus on the same way to do this piece of PD, and the driver's ed teacher basically got up and left, and on the way out said, "This has nothing to do with what I do," and walks out. Well, that's the mentality that we need to be cautiously aware of, so that everybody feels like they're being they're focused on, and it's really about them. So to that end, these leaders at the school level can start really keeping the pulse of the building and understanding what the needs are. And I'm going to give an example later on that really kind of pulls all that together. But then the idea of having teachers coach teachers, utilizing the people that you have in the building so that they can work together. Because I know when I was a 5th grade teacher, there were 2 other 5th grade teachers that were dynamic. but we taught at the same time. So what we really ran into was, how am I going to be able to go watch her teach, because we have the same planning, but not leave my classroom? And that's where that video piece came in. Was I was able to have a leadership team that said, you need to see Miss Smith teach, because she's amazing. And now that video has that, the principal doesn't need to come take my room anymore so that I can go watch this person teach. I can watch them teach through video. So that's where this leadership is going to be able to design really the next steps of what needs to happen. And then you get down to the PLC piece of using that video to really be able to drive instruction, to really be able to look at data and then look at what professional development we need. And by doing this, if it's action-based research, you're going to be able to have your strongest teachers be able to video themselves and then use that as an example or a model within this PLC that's very focused on around a very specific topic. And then all teachers can then video themselves quickly in the classroom, because it's really gotten to the point now that it's as simple as, if you have a phone, you have a capability of videoing yourself.
Right.
So if I know that we're focused on, as a leadership team, take literacy, for example, and then even if you go down to the elementary and early elementary school, that you're really looking at the workshop model and how I'm able to implement the workshop model with some shared reading and what we're doing, and the difference of shared reading and guided reading. Everybody's doing that at the same time, but yet if I'm able to use PLCs, everybody can video a 10-minute segment of what they did, pass it back to the leadership team, and then the leadership team can then analyze where the strengths and areas of growth are still needed within the building, so that we can then personalize that professional development even more, rather than saying, oh, well, so-and-so can come in and talk about guided reading. Well, that's great, but so-and-so is not from this district, and they don't know what's going on, so they can't speak directly to my kids. But I could certainly say, hey, Johnny did this when you were able to implement it this way. Did you see the look on Johnny's face when he then was engaged in this conversation? And by doing that, that's the idea of really building personalized professional development that can be totally effective for every child as well as every teacher in the building.
So some of what you said there already addresses the issues that you brought up, Melanie, around the traditional sit and get. Somebody comes in from the outside to try and coach us for a couple of hours, and they don't know our district. They may not know our rubrics or our framework, and they're not effective. Whereas where you have teachers coaching teachers, all within the same district or same building, that really changes things. And I have to give a shout out to Maine Township District 207 outside of Chicago that does a fantastic job. The superintendent and his professional learning team there have set up a very similar program where throughout the district, yes, they have instructional coaches, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, this year their senior graduating class in their high schools will be the first graduating class where every single teacher they've ever had all 4 years has been coached or has had a coach, which is a pretty amazing thing and a pretty rare thing to be able to do. So
in Hampton, or especially in Wade Hampton, one of our goals is building that leadership capacity across our school and utilizing what we have here. And so we use our leadership team time to really come together, hone in on what that needs. We've also, in addition to PLC this year, added collaboration, where though our PLCs are mixed with the different content areas, we break out later in the week into a collaboration. And you get to have more focused discussion with those who are teaching in the same content area as you.
Perfect. All right, I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to move on to our next one here and talking about planning for sustainability. Obviously a huge concern, and you had already voiced it, Dennis, so go right ahead.
So, and this is really what got us to the next level, was the idea that we needed to be able to plan for something that allowed for us to have the same level of human capital, but at when programmatic changes happen. So we were part of a TAP model, which is a strong professional development model, but a very expensive professional development model. And so within that, we were trying to figure out, losing grant funding, how are we going to be able to have the PLCs? How are we going to be able to give the teachers that one-on-one coaching time, that follow-up that Melanie talked about, and how are we going to be able to do that with less money? So one of the things that we did was say, okay, well, how do we connect the dots? Because we're spending $30,000 per school on this, and we're spending $27,000 on this, and we're having this person come in for $6,000, and we're doing this initiative for $28,000. How can we pull all those things together so that we are not working harder, but we're working smarter, and we're pulling everything together to be able to focus on one thing, and that's creating stronger teachers to be able to create stronger students. And what we then, and this is what led us to using the advanced feedback system, is we were able to utilize technology in an effort to be able to focus our growth on teachers, focus our growth on giving feedback to teachers, ongoing feedback, both in the professional development setting from the PLCs as well as the coaching setting, without adding those extra people, without adding that extra time. And that's what ended up becoming this major piece, was if we're able to have a phone and we're able to upload it to what we needed, we could then offer every teacher an opportunity to be coached every week, every teacher an opportunity to be able to identify what they did based on their professional learning community and get feedback on that as well. And the school or the school leadership team could then get a kind of a comprehensive feel of what's going on in the building. Where's it going well? Where do we still need to be able to focus our next round of PD on? And we were able to do it by saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, whereas we were using instructional coaches, now we can have mentors and peer teachers. And, giving a mentor $5,000 to $10,000 a year compared to giving a instructional coach $90,000 a year, those two things, the costs are so offset with using technology that you can really focus time and effort a lot better. So that's how we were able to plan for sustainability, simply by using technology to not to take the place of the interaction, but to enhance the interaction and allow the interaction to take time or to happen at different times. And I can give you an example. There's a principal that told me during my research that said, I get up at 3 or 4 o'clock every morning, but yet I am busy from the time I get to school to the time I leave. This has allowed me the opportunity to coach teachers from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. before I actually, go and get ready for school and get to the school. So it gives me 3 hours of time to coach that I never would have had otherwise, and through the use of technology. That kind of idea of adding time and doing that is something that is precious when you're an administrator and an instructional coach, or even a teacher that you're focused on teaching your own kids. You can't really develop that time for others.
Right. Melanie, anything to add?
Just that it helped me as well being able to use the video because I am only part-time coaching. I am in the classroom half of the day, and so those are blocks of time that I'm not able to get out and go see other teachers if I have the same planning period as a teacher. Obviously, I'm not going to leave my students to go and try to coach at that point in time. So this has provided that time for me as well to be able to provide more coaching to others and also to be coached myself.
Awesome. Very good. I'm going to move us along to our third piece here about actually using video. So Dennis, why don't you set us up here and sort of take us through the steps of, it starts with self-reflection, peers, mentors, and then also the leadership team. And then I know you have some specific examples that you and Melanie want to give, but why don't you talk to us about video?
Sure. So the idea here, and you kind of heard me talk as I was moving forward with this anyway, is that video allows that saving time, concentrating efforts, mainly because you're able to focus your time and your efforts around one thing, and that's growth. And that's growth of teachers and then growth of students. I know Melanie's got a great example. I'm going to ask her to and give this example toward the end of this slide, really about the focus of students and how the video helped that focus of student piece. Because in here, as we're looking, to me, when you start focusing on growth, reflection's key. So understanding how to use video to be able to give that reflection. I mentioned this earlier that the principal talked about it, but being able to coach through video is different. And that's one of the hurdles that I'll say that was my initial pitfall was I just thought, hey, this is just another way to do that. Well, it is another way to do that, but it's a very different way to do that. So it doesn't take the place of adults interacting. It allows more time to focus that interaction. So that, having the 45 minutes of time to sit in the classroom and then going through and then embedding and then having that coaching session can happen at a smaller time frame, but it also allows the focus of the conversations to be able to see the teacher's self-reflection and then the reflection from the observer and be able to focus on maybe 3 or 4 key points that they were able to bring back rather than this more of a lengthy post-conference that gets to the point finally, but doesn't necessarily meet that high level of focus. The other piece is that idea of coaching and then moving that from a coach's job. If you're a great coach, you work yourself out of a job because the teacher becomes so self-reflective. And this goes back to those theories I was talking about, so self-reflective that they are now coaching themselves and going through that self-reflection. And Don, I think this is a great spot to talk about, Dr. Moody, and one of the things that he talks about with the use of video is a concern of administrators and district level folks, and is sometimes that, the teacher keeps deleting the videos that they made of themselves, and they're only sending me their best videos. So to me, and this is Dr. Moody, so I don't want to take credit for this, but he really talked about the idea of, isn't that what we're trying to get teachers to do? If they are reflecting and identifying what's working and not working and continually changing that to turn in a better video, then we are accomplishing our goal in making sure that teachers are becoming self-reflectors. And that really, to me, is what the video can do so much more than the traditional observational model.
That's a great point.
Piece of that
just if I could jump in
for
the folks that are listening and may not know, Dennis is referring to Michael Moody, who is our founder, a former teacher, principal, coach, CAO in DC Public Schools, and he had somebody voice this concern of, I think that the teachers are gaming the system with the videos because they're deleting them. And you're making the exact point that he makes, Dennis, is that, well, what's happening? If that teacher is watching the video and seeing something that he or she doesn't like and deletes them, they are self-correcting. And I've had another superintendent who has used video and used our software say the exact same thing. The goal was self-reflection and then pure feedback and coaching. But I remember him saying to me these exact words: if I only get to the point where in the first year they're using video for self-reflection and they're self-correcting, I've won. I've taken a leap forward. And they've taken control of their professional learning at some level. And of course, we as a district have to put things in place to continue to support them and give them opportunities for their learning, but there's no gaming the system here at all. So you make a really good point.
And then the final point of that, before I give an example of it, is, Don mentioned earlier the concept. So when we start talking about teachers coaching teachers, they start controlling their professional development. They control their reflection. They identify what they're working on and identify others that can help them. What better way to build collegiality and build the environment that is so vital in affecting solid instruction than having that teachers identifying other teachers that they can then work together with, and then the principal, the instructional coach, the mentors become facilitators between teachers, because it becomes so organic that the teachers own the process. That's how you concentrate efforts, because it's no longer about what I think as an observer. It's they're strong enough to identify their self-reflection to think about what they're doing. And then that becomes then the model for what you're doing in PLCs, and you're giving each other feedback on PLCs based on what you're seeing. And based on the conversations and the reflection within, all of that stems around the idea of how to use this video to really focus that effort into how we can really make it better for the teacher, make the teachers stronger, which will then turn into student achievement. The bell ringer example that I wanted to give is specific to a leadership team, and this is something that it was when I was doing a lot of my research, it was so powerful to me. As the leadership, the principal said, you know, I have to deal with 30 or 40 teachers, and it's a K2 it's a K2 school. And she said the problem with what we do though, in being part of a Reading First initiative in the past, is all of our teachers teach reading at the same time. So what we want to be able to focus on is specific to reading instruction, because the data says that this is what we need, but we don't necessarily know what's going on with instruction, because by the time I go through every teacher's classroom, we're a month and a half later, or almost 2 months later, because if one teacher a day in reading, because we do it at the same time, I've missed 2 months before we start to move, and things have already changed by then. So what this allowed them to do is they were able to video all the teachers doing the exact same thing during their literacy piece, brought it back to the leadership team. Each member of the leadership team was able to watch and then come back and say, here are the trends that I saw. They then gave different examples from different videos, came up with exactly what they wanted it to look like through some of the stellar videos. So this wasn't just a find the bad. This is a great example of what we're trying to get teachers to do. Showed that to the faculty, and then within the next week, all the teaching staff was then able to video themselves again over the course of the week, and then show how they were then implementing the new strategy that they wanted to implement in their reading. It took a total of about a week and a half, and in that week and a half, you had 40 teachers change their teaching practice specific to what they knew was best practice based on what they saw and a teacher's data based on what they've seen in the past as well. So by doing that, where a teacher or a principal or administrator or instructional coach couldn't get into all the classrooms, by doing it this way and using this video, they were able to see every lesson of literature on a given day, identify strengths and weaknesses, and be able to follow up with every individual teacher within 5 days. That is unheard of in a building like that, and it became the immediate strength of how to use this and identify it as professional development. And I think that's the idea of saving time and concentrating effort to really make that happen.
Yeah, that's music to my ears, and I'm sure our entire Insight Advanced team, when they hear that, when you design a product like this, you have very specific use cases in mind, but ultimately, once it's in the hands of the districts, the schools, it's going to take on a whole nother life of its own. Yes, those initial use cases make sense, but when you talk about those specific examples and being able to act so quickly, I think it's not just the reach, but it's the saving of time and just being more efficient that you're really describing that seems most powerful to me. So with that, I'm looking at the time again, and I want to make sure we're giving Melanie enough time. So I'm going to keep us going and moving right along. So Melanie, you are using Advanced Feedback, which is the software that we at Insight Advanced have put out there for your team and so many other districts and schools to use. And again, you have this great unique perspective of coming at it from both the teacher perspective and as the coach. And I'd love it, we're not going to get into some big demo here, but I'd love it if these screenshots you've shared with us can sort of talk us through what the experience is like from both the roles of the teacher and the coach.
Sure, and I'll take it from the teacher perspective first, because that's kind of where I started. As you can see on the dashboard here, really is what I do love about this is it's a place for me to kind of catalog my teaching, so I can go back and reflect and see what kinds of things I've done. And if you'll just click to the next slide, I also like the feature that I'm able to title it, put when it was, what content, and the next slide, I'm able to put any other resources, any documentation, anything that goes along with a lesson that I'm uploading here, because in my opinion, you can watch a video, but it also helps to have those resources, the objectives, what your end goal was for a lesson, especially within your own self-reflection, because I'm teaching every day and most teachers are teaching more than one prep. And so, you know, to be able to go back and really reflect on a specific lesson on a specific day is really nice. So if you go to the next slide, this particular lesson was a lesson that I recorded myself. It was about the causes and effects of the Great Depression. And when I went back and watched the video, it was very clear that my students really struggled with the causes. The effects didn't seem to be as big of a deal. So that was something that I was able to reflect on pretty quickly and go back and address in another lesson to make sure that they had everything they needed. But also to think forward, if I'm teaching the same subject, which happens to be U.S. history, and I am teaching it this semester, I need to do something differently. So I really love the fact that I was able to and take the time, go back and watch, and also make comments to myself that I could go back and look. If you go to the next slide, it shows where I'm able to put the things that I'm doing, what happened in a particular place and timestamp, what I'm noticing overall. And you can see the last there at 3954, I noticed that students were struggling to identify the causes. So, I mean, obviously I probably knew that within the lesson, but to be able to actually have that opportunity to really go back, think through that, what can I do differently? If I change one thing in this lesson, would it change an outcome for a student? Was very, very powerful to me. The other piece that I love is that then I get to choose who I share it with. So maybe, you know, I've reflected and maybe there's something that I could get a different perspective on, whether it's a content person, my principal, who I really value her opinion greatly, or another content area teacher who is strong in best practice that could really give me some information. So on the next slide, the next two slides actually, I was able to share this video and it takes on the coaching role now. Not just me coaching, but I was able to be coached. On the next slide, you can see comments from the specific teacher who actually provided feedback to me. And then we were able to come together after we both watched it and have an opportunity to have a conversation later. But I was able to read her comments before and kind of put those things into practice immediately. The other thing I really like about this is once I'm able to have the video there, I can share this in leadership. I can share this in PLC. And then I've always kind of had the I go first stance when it comes to coaching. So, you know, put myself out there. Look, I'm recording in my classroom. I'm trying something new. Yes, I know it's not always comfortable to do that, but we're all trying to grow here. And so I think putting that message out to the teachers as well, it gets them on board a little bit more, and then they're more open to the coaching, no matter what form it comes in. And so,
Melanie, can you talk about that sort of I hate to call it this, but that emotional aspect of this, of what it's like to, you know, to sort of get over that hump of, you know, nobody really likes to see themselves or hear themselves at first, but, you know, I think that's really changing, especially with EdTPA and teacher prep programs and video being a part of that. But what's it like getting over that from the teacher perspective, and what, you know, what's your experience been with other teachers that you coach?
I think that Dennis kind of spoke to this earlier when in this district as well, when we first started moving and changing and moving into a different professional development model, people heard the word observation, and in a district where you probably weren't observed very much, all of a sudden people are in your classroom, and that's very intimidating. For me, that was intimidating because, you know, we think of it sometimes as, oh, I'm being judged, but I think it has to be a mind shift, and I had to shift my mind as well. Like, it's not about a judgment, it's about being a better teacher for the students in my classroom. And I think that when we build that within our leadership team and we start asking them, hey, just try it, try recording yourself and you just reflect, you're not showing it to anyone yet, and then building in the time to say, okay, now share it with one other person, and then moving from that point, it helps to build that mindset of we're all growing together, and it has to really take on that life, or it might not be successful, quite honestly. I didn't want to be videoed 14 years ago when I started teaching. Like, I didn't want to watch myself. I didn't want anyone to watch me. Now it's the norm for me. And just having the conversations with my co-teachers, with people who are across my school, I think once teachers see how valuable that input and that feedback without a score, without a judgment can be, it can really move forward. It can move teachers forward in the classroom, students forward, and schools forward.
You know, and I think that's sort of the first step in the process. And eventually, if it's a non-evaluative way of doing it, you can still get into the whole scoring aspect of it, because you can get into then the data and tracking growth from the, you know, from the administrator level to the coach level, and then really, once again, empowering the teacher to track his or her own growth over time. And I think there's various stages to this. For sure. So
Absolutely.
again, you know, I appreciate that perspective, Melanie. Thank you very much. I'm just, again, being very conscious of the time. So I'd love to switch to talking about outcomes, and then there are a couple of questions that are here for us to answer. And I'm just going to leave this up here and maybe let you guys kind of talk about it. But for sure, we are hearing some of these outcomes that you're seeing about, you know, from the administrator, coach, and teacher level. But Dennis, why don't you go first, maybe from the administrator level here?
I think that what you're looking at from the administrator level is that idea of saving time. We all know that administrators get bogged down in administrivia. I mean, you have plans and go into a teacher's classroom, and yet a fight broke out in the cafeteria, and now you got to deal with that and the parents. You're all set to do something, and the district office calls a meeting or anything like that causes that time. This allows you to always be willing to watch and give feedback and be able to focus and use your time a little bit more wisely, both on professional development, on leadership team, as well as in feedback and observations. You know, I think that's the number one, because your job as an administrator is to not only grow your teachers, but at the same time, develop or retain them. And we know that the number one thing on retention is about the culture within the building and the work environment. Well, this, I can honestly say, using it and studying, and what everybody has said is, this has made teachers more willing to talk to each other. This has made the building more of a collegial atmosphere, which in turn makes teachers want to stay because they feel that they're getting more support. And that, from an administrator standpoint, is what is so highly effective about being able to utilize this video feedback systems.
Well, and it's so elusive too, you know, setting the right culture and getting those things to sort of all come together where you're building that culture of trust more than anything is such a tough thing to get to. I think it takes tremendous leadership, but it sounds like there's a very organic aspect to it based on what you're describing.
I believe so, and you're right, and it does change, but this allows you to keep your finger a little bit more on the pulse of what's going on, and even watching teachers' classrooms, you could be watching the kids as well. So, and Melanie referenced that, is that you really see what the difference in kids, so that you can continue to adapt your environment to ensure that it's meeting the needs of the kids, which is the most important.
Melanie, how about from your perspective? Again, you know, we have a lot of things up here, but regarding the role of coaches and teachers and what you see, what are your thoughts on the outcomes you're seeing?
You know, my big thing is every school is unique, but even the teachers within that school are unique and their needs are unique. One coach can't do it. I'm a history teacher, so I can't sit here and tell you that I can go in and know everything in our math content. So just that coach to coach and building more coaches within the school, and people that can support one another and really and truly coach each other content and pedagogy and best practice and those kinds of things, is going to be monumental in moving schools forward, in my opinion. For me personally, as a teacher in my classroom, simply watching myself and reflecting on my process or the practice in my classroom, that's going to move me forward. If I'm able to really see, well, this worked, is something I need to continue doing. This didn't work, I can change a couple of things here and get a totally different outcome in the lesson, and that's going to be the most important thing for classroom teachers.
Awesome. I'm going to keep us moving along here. Key takeaways, Dennis, from your perspective?
Sure. I think that the idea of really utilizing this video technology for feedback allows you to create purpose, allows the observations to now become more about reflection, which to me is again a key takeaway that needs to be understood. Is when you first start this, you have to start it as we are building a culture of reflection, because teachers are afraid of the gotcha. And then all of a sudden, if you add the I'm capturing every single thing you did, even some of our greatest teachers, and you've heard Melanie even talk about it, and she is an amazing teacher, that you start to see this fear of, if you capture it, you can use it against me. So to me, that purpose for self-reflection and really guiding that support is one thing that this does. The second is the focus. Again, professional learning, individualized PD, all of that allows you to focus your leadership team on a given area, your PLC into a given area, or your individual teacher into a given area, and then still allows that feedback to occur, which is very much individualized. And then the last one is really that creation of time, the idea that you can utilize this not solely in substitution of human capital, but certainly to enhance the ability of the human capital to make that time more worthwhile and less of having to run through the motions to get to the worthwhile aspects of it. I think those are, to me, the three key takeaways from utilizing video technology. And from the research that I've done on it, this is really what administrators, coaches, and teachers really talk about as why it is effective and why it is effective at that next level.
Oh, wonderful. I'll move us to questions. You can send in questions using the little question feature on the dashboard. One is a sort of more practical question, and I'll take a stab at it and then turn it over to you guys. How many videos should be made, and what's the length of the videos? I'll just kind of say it from hearing a lot of different use cases of advanced feedback. It really varies. There are some folks that, almost like the bell ringer example that Dennis gave, that'll just record a few minutes. But the sweet spot that we keep hearing is, 15, 20 minutes of video is plenty. You don't have to record a 50-minute video every single time. But what we're hearing is that shorter videos can really capture the essence. You can see the level of engagement of students in that amount of time, and that seems to be what we're hearing. And the other thing is, you can quickly do that on your phone. It's really easy. You're not setting up a bunch of equipment. I need to say that we do have an iOS app that makes it very easy. You record that 15 minutes of video right in the app. It compresses it for you, uploads it right into your account, and you can start self-reflecting. But Melanie, from what you've seen, what's sort of been the best way in terms of number of videos that you create or the length of the videos?
I have done multiple lengths. So, for example, I was very focused on my own reflection on small grouping at the high school and how small grouping can impact student achievement in my classroom. So there are segments that I uploaded that were literally just, a 5 to 10 minute small group session that I did. But I've also recorded the entire lesson. We're on a block schedule, so that's 90 minutes. So I have both types of, or both lengths that I have found very, very beneficial, and it just depends on the purpose, I think.
Okay. There is a question about frameworks and rubrics. Are you using one or more than one?
So in South Carolina, we have one state teacher evaluation rubric. It is based on NIET's TAP rubric as well as Danielson's work. So everybody is using that. However, each district also has a lot of their own individualized walkthrough rubrics or something along those lines. The benefit of this is that it can really utilize whatever you want to. So we have our South Carolina rubric uploaded into the system simply because that's what teachers are most comfortable with, and most walkthrough instruments talk about that. but the versatility of it is really what benefits us.
Right, we are able to take in multiple frameworks if necessary. So it's as easy as possible, for folks to implement. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to keep this going. We have done a recording of this webinar that'll be made available to everyone who was able to join us live today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. You can share that link with others as well. If folks registered for this and weren't able to attend the whole live event, they'll have the recording. Don't forget about the free ebook. That's a PDF that's right there in the handout section of the dashboard. Check us out at insightadvance.com, and we've also kind enough of Dennis and Melanie not just to share their time with us today and their thoughts and experiences and sort of some of the here's what you should do and here's what you shouldn't do, but they've also given their email addresses as well in case folks wanted to ask them specific questions. So Dennis, Melanie, thanks so much again. I know you guys are both very busy, but you just have some tremendous insights to share based on your experiences with this so far, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate you taking the time to share those things with everyone today.
I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, everyone.
My pleasure. It's certainly a passion.
All right, thanks so much. That's going to conclude our webinar. Thanks very much to everyone for joining us.